Welcome to Forte's MBA Alumnae Insight Series. Each of these recordings features a panel of successful businesswomen representing diverse industries and career stages, as featured during our Forte MBA forums.
To our esteemed moderator today, Lorianne Kloppenberg. Lorianne is the Chief Investment Officer of Equities at Loomis Sales, and she's retired from that role and now is a member of the Adams Fund Board of Directors. And this company is interesting because it manages two of the country's oldest closed-end equity funds, both of which are listed and traded on the NYSE. So it's really exciting to have you here. And not only, Lorianne, does she have a 30-year career at Loomis, but also serves on the Forte Board of Directors. So she knows Forte, of course, very, very well. And I really can't think of anybody better to moderate this discussion. So Lorianne, I'd love for you to introduce yourself further and then take the conversation away from here.
Terrific. Thank you, Crystal. And Crystal gave the highlights. As she said, I am a Forte board member and I chair the board's finance committee. I call myself a financial services veteran. I did have a 32-year career at Loomis, which is an investment management firm based in Boston. I began my career there as an equity research associate. I was an equity analyst. I ran equity research. And my final years, I was the chief investment officer of the equity group and the chief strategy officer for the firm. I retired several years ago and realized that while I loved the flexibility, I really wanted to stay involved with the financial markets and the investment industry. So as Crystal mentioned, I serve now on the board of directors of Adams Funds, and I also consult for a family office working on their investment committee. On the nonprofit side, I also serve on investment committees for a variety of organizations. Personally, I am happily married to my husband, Bill, for 39 years this year. And I'm the proud mother of two daughters, aged 28 and 30. So I care a lot about what's going on in their careers and hopefully have some insight into some of the things that you are all thinking about and facing. As your moderator tonight, it's my job to make sure the evening runs smoothly. We'll start with the panelists and I'll have each of them introduce themselves and share their view on the value of having an MBA, and then we'll move into some questions. We have put together some questions we think will have broad appeal to the audience, but we're going to save a good amount of time for your questions. So as you think of things, please do put the questions into the Q&A part of your Zoom, and we will work from there. So without further ado, let's get on to the important part of the evening, the panelists. And Julia, would you mind starting us off?
Absolutely. Thank you, Lorianne. Hi, everyone. My name is Julia Zhang. I am currently in the consulting practice at Ernst & Young. I'm a current senior manager, been there for 6 years since graduation from Georgetown's MBA program. Prior to business school, I worked in financial services for about 5 years. So I was in the front office as a financial advisor doing business development, and then I did research as well after that. So for me, you know, getting an MBA was a dream of mine, right? It helped me further my career, make some different career moves, which I think we'll talk about in a little bit. So it was one of the best decisions I made to get my MBA. Just a couple fun facts about me. I am from New York, or actually, I guess I can say I'm from New York. I've been here 10 years, and they say after you've lived in New York for 10 years, you're an official New Yorker. So I live in New York. I grew up outside of DC in Maryland, and I love to travel. I miss travel so much, right? So my best travel stories, I spent a summer before business school, actually, volunteering in Thailand. So I volunteered in an elephant camp and I taught English, which was my version of studying abroad because I didn't get to do it in college. But I'm excited to be here today. Thank you for having me.
Chantel, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Chantal Adams. I am a 2014 graduate of UNC Keenan Flagler Business School, where I was also a Forte Fellow. And I just realized as we were going through intros that this marks actually 10 years that I've been a member of Forte, because I became a member when I was in your shoes thinking about going to business school back in 2010. I ended up applying and going to Keenan Flagler in the fall of 2012. So I've been where you are. Professionally, between undergraduate and business school, I too worked in financial services. I have an undergraduate degree in finance from Simmons University in Boston. And I went to get my MBA in order to switch careers. So I currently am a senior manager on the consumer marketing team at Align Technology in the San Francisco Bay Area of California. I primarily focus on marketing the Invisalign brand to moms and positioning clear aligners as a true alternative to braces for teenagers. And as someone who's had braces twice, as well as jaw surgery, I'm very passionate about us all knowing what those true alternatives are. In addition to that, fun facts about me, I've also been a pescatarian for 10 years. So 2010 was a big year for me. And I love all things beauty, health, and wellness. So happy to be here. And I love Forte. I've been a volunteer with the organization for many years, probably about 8 now. And really happy to be here with you all. This is pretty much where you find me every September, is on these calls or at these events in person. So welcome and good luck.
Oh, thank you very much. Allison?
Thanks, Lorianne. Hi, everyone. My name is Allison. I am an MBA out of Toronto, Canada. Previous to doing my MBA, I worked in advertising. So I was a communications strategist. And I hit this point in my career where I just felt like I didn't get to make the big, like, important, meaty decisions. And I had these, like, there were these bigger kinds of problems that were facing businesses that I really wanted to sink my teeth into and work on, and just, like, challenge myself mentally as well. And the MBA really felt unattainable until I started to research it and learn a little bit more and get some encouragement from people around me. So that's the reason why I'm here today, is because I feel like so many of my friends and so many other women out there feel similarly. And I just want to kind of debunk a lot of those myths and make it clear that, you know, if I can do it, you can do it. Since the MBA, so I went to University of Toronto. Since then, I worked as a consultant for Bain & Company. I'm now at ZS Associates as a manager. I've worked and done some work with the United Nations for Smart Sustainable Cities. And then I've also gotten to do stuff like run a primary research work stream for private equity and do a 10-year investment plan for a $15 billion company. And right now I'm developing out, like, AI-driven communications between pharmaceuticals and healthcare providers to make sure that we're delivering messaging which is, like, really relevant at the right time through the right channel to the right people, I guess. Fun facts about me. So I have a Boston Terrier named Lou, or Lou Dog, Lucifer when he's bad. I love running marathons and powerlifting and biking. So you'll typically find me out enjoying the weather while it's nice.
That's terrific. Thank you, Allison. So let's move into our questions. Julia, could you tell us why an MBA for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, when I was in your shoes, I actually was thinking about an MBA for a couple of years. I was in financial services. You know, it's a pretty male-dominated industry. And it's very easy to, you know, get comfortable with your day-to-day. For me personally, so I went to Penn for my undergrad. I was pre-med. I came from a family of doctors. I was really focused on, you know, going into medicine. I decided toward the end of my college years that I wanted to go into business. So one of the reasons I wanted to get my MBA or a further degree, at the time I was thinking could potentially be a CFA as well, was I wanted to really get that business foundation, that background that I didn't necessarily get from my undergrad degree. So about 3 years into my career, I was thinking about taking the GMAT, taking, you know, furthering my education, or looking into the CFA certification. And I'm so happy I decided to get, an MBA. I think it opened different doors for me that I wouldn't necessarily have gotten if I stayed in industry and didn't get, a further degree, or if I had gone the CFA route. For me, the MBA was about opening my network, opening my eyes to a different world that I didn't necessarily know, right? I had known pre-med, I had known financial services, but I didn't know much else, right? So I wanted the chance to explore, to further my education as well, and to build that network. And I'm so glad I did it. It took me about the 2-year time frame. I was going back and forth, right? Whether the opportunity cost was really worth it, whether I should go full-time or part-time, and I weighed that decision as well. And for me, I just wanted to go all in, right? I wanted to say, this is what I want to do. I wanted to do a career change potentially. So I figured, getting the MBA, getting that degree, furthering my education would get me there. So that was my why MBA story, and I'm so glad I did it.
Oh, thank you. Now, you make your decision. The next step is, okay, where should I go? What about the application? Is it overwhelming? Chantel, what can you tell us about that? Did you have a concern when you were thinking about getting an MBA in terms of the application, the whole process? Share your thoughts along those lines.
Yes, of course. So my story is a little bit unique. I actually knew from my first year of college that I wanted an MBA. Back then, I had big dreams of being a CFO. I loved everything about finance and financial services. And I thought, well, I'll start my career on Wall Street and then I'll get into corporate finance and I'll be a big CFO one day. Little did I know I would graduate from college and say, oh, maybe this isn't actually for me, right? I enjoyed it for a few years, but then I found myself getting a little bit bored and having many questions similar to Allison, bigger questions around what was the strategy and the brand strategy behind some of the companies whose scorecards that I had to own and rate because I was a credit analyst at the time. And I just didn't have the education or the business foundation in order to answer some of those questions. So I decided I want to go and get my MBA full time in order to make a career switch so that I'm in the driver's seat in terms of strategy and in terms of what the brand of the company that I'm working for stands for. But I will tell you that if I could tell my 20-something-year-old self a little something, it would be, don't underestimate the GMAT. That was by far the biggest mistake that I made in the process. I had a mentor of mine, actually, who's a Harvard Business School alum. She bought me GMAT books my junior year of college and said, start studying now. It's not going to be easy. We went and visited Chicago Booth and Kellogg, and I loved it. And I was so excited, and I thought I was going to do the right thing, and then I just didn't, right? So I found myself a year after college saying, okay, I need to start studying. And instead of really dedicating time daily, hours daily to start studying, I would study here and there on the weekends. And I found myself, even after taking the GMAT the first 2 times, with a score that I really wasn't happy with. And I knew it didn't best reflect who I was as the candidate. So if I could give you all any advice, it would be, number one, to take the GMAT seriously. Study for it as often as you possibly can, daily if you can, because practice does make better. I won't tell you that it makes perfect, but it makes better, certainly. And the other thing that I will say, and I always advise people against this, this is something I ended up having to do because I just didn't stick to my plan, but I ended up taking the GMAT for the 3rd time. And when I was studying for it for the 3rd time, although my score did jump 70 points in 7 weeks, I was also writing essays at the same time. I do not recommend that. It is extremely overwhelming. It is one of the things that I think will start to take away from who you are and how you're able to represent yourself in your day job. And that's not anything that you want, right? As a professional working woman, you want to show up as your best self. So I would advise you to do your best to sort of decouple the application process. Focus on the GMAT when you need to be focused on the GMAT, and then focus on your essays and your interviews and all the other parts in your recommendations and all those other parts when it's time to focus on those if you can. Because then it's easier for you to balance and you don't have to worry about showing up to your current job, exhausted or not feeling like you're representing yourself as best you possibly can.
Well, thank you. Now, Allison, what was your experience with the application and the GMAT? Was it similar to Chantel's, or do you have sort of a different experience?
Yeah, so Chantel, I actually wrote my GMAT 3 times as well. So yeah, it's hard. So for me, I think my experience was slightly different in that I was out of school for a bit before I came to the GMAT. So I graduated from Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario with a Bachelor of Arts and a Bachelor of Education. I became a teacher for a bit before I got into advertising. And then in advertising, you know, however many years after I'd finished university is when I picked up the GMAT books. And for me, the kind of the verbal communication skills, the critical reasoning, that stuff was like my bread and butter, but the math stuff was really intimidating for me because I hadn't really touched anything math related since high school. For me, I think key to success was recognizing the way in which I process information. So for some people, they can study on their own and that's fine. For me, like being in a classroom setting, having someone I can go to with questions, being in a peer group with people that are also working through it, like all of that stuff was pretty key for me. I think the other piece that was important is that working in advertising, you can work some longer hours. And if you don't properly protect that time, it can be really easy for work to like eat up those evenings. By having a set time and a schedule, like with classes, and having somebody kind of break out the topics into bite-sized pieces, that really enabled me to protect that study time and to really be focused. And so I think that doing that kind of like GMAT prep course was really important for me. I do want to emphasize, I think like the GMAT's a little bit of a puzzle, right? It's trying to figure out where your weaknesses are and how you can chip away at them. And the weaknesses can be both, you know, the algebra-based questions, but it can also be the psychological aspects of like psyching yourself up and feeling like you're ready and, you know, going into that test confident and making sure that you have snacks because it's long. And I think that like when I finally cracked that puzzle and like, you know, got my 700, I was so over the moon happy because I knew like how much effort I'd put into it.
Well, thank you. That's very helpful.
Yeah.
Now, how about the financial parts of this? Chantel, can you share your experience? What were you thinking when you decided, okay, I'm going to go ahead here? MBAs can be pretty expensive. What are your thoughts and how did you manage that?
Yeah, this is a huge question that most candidates have. And given that I knew I wanted to go back to get my MBA at some point, what I did was when I actually graduated from college, I moved back home because my plan was to go back to school within 2 years. It ended up being 3. But I moved back home and I saved as much money as I could. I also went ahead and paid off all of my credit card debt. And then I started overpaying on my undergraduate student loans so that I was in a pretty decent financial position just in case I ended up having to pay for my MBA. I also did my research. I did research on organizations like Forte, also on the Consortium for Graduate Study and Management, which is an organization similar to Forte, but focuses on underrepresented minorities. And I was fortunate enough actually to get a fellowship from both. So my tuition ended up being fully covered, which I was very grateful for. But even just in case I was not able to secure any outside financing for my MBA, I was fully prepared both to pay any cash reserves that I had towards my MBA and then as well as borrow, because I did do tons of analytics. I'm still a finance person at heart. I had many spreadsheets comparing the ROI of an MBA versus other graduate degrees, and the MBA by far was the highest ROI. So I knew that no matter what, I was investing into my future, and I was at that point still in my early 20s. So I knew that my earning potential for the rest of my career was going to be quite significant, and I felt comfortable making that investment in myself.
Oh, thank you. Allison, do you have any different thoughts along this line of questions?
Yeah, I think I took a slightly different approach to Chantel. I also got a scholarship through Forte, so that was awesome. But I think that I went the debt route. So When I started to go around and talk to different schools, I learned that there's lots of different financing options. At the University of Toronto, the way that it works is that you get a loan from one of the Canadian banks, and the school will cover your interest for the duration of your time during the program, and then you start having to pay it back 6 months after graduation. So when you're actually making money, that's when you start to pay for the loan. Just echoing Chantel's piece about ROI though, and return on investment, is going into the program, I think that and I'm going to talk numbers. I'm going to be like very open with salary numbers. I hope that's okay with everyone. I can't see you, so I'm going to assume that it is. Before I went into doing my MBA, I think my salary was around like $45,000 to $50,000. I did my MBA, and coming out of the program, my salary was around $225,000. So 225, yeah. So the MBA like drastically changed the amount of money I was making. I think like the time it took me to like repay that loan was, I think maybe like half a year or something like that. It was pretty fast. So definitely go in, and as you're researching your schools, look at the average salaries coming out of a program, and also consider how much you're making coming in, because as Chantel has mentioned, like that it changes your trajectory for your earning potential afterwards.
Julia, what was your experience here with looking at it from a financial perspective?
Yeah, so I didn't know I was going to go to business school until, a few years after I started working. And for me, I did a similar type of ROI assessment as well, where I was saying, what would it be if I stayed at my current job, getting the estimated salary increases that I could potentially make versus, taking 2 years to go to school and then come back. I think, for me, it was worth it, right? It was worth it to look at the different financing options that I could get out there. And it was worth it to take a break from working to focus on my studies. I think to Allison's point, right, the type of jobs you get after you get an MBA pay for itself in a sense, right? Because I think a lot, now that I'm on the recruiting side, looking for MBA hires, we're looking for potential future leaders, right, in our practice. So we go in with a set of criteria that we believe MBAs have over non-MBAs, right? And specifically as a female leader, I think it's important for women to feel that that benefit of, going to school, taking the, hiatus if you're going full time, and coming back and really feeling that it's paid off after 2 years.
Thank you. And while I have you, in thinking about that application process and your essays that say, what do you want to be when you grow up? When you think back on that, are you doing what you expected? Is there a big difference between thinking about your MBA, applying, and where you are today?
Yeah, that's a great question, Lorianne. So when I applied to business school, I actually applied to 5 different schools, and I did my research. I think that's really important, right? To figure out where schools place you, what companies come to recruit you, where the school is located. And for me, having done financial services, I had figured, once I finished business school, I'd either go back into financial services in a completely different role or go into consulting of some sort. I wrote my essay about being a healthcare consultant because I was pre-med. I am doing consulting, but I'm not doing healthcare consulting. I'm actually doing financial services consulting at EY. And I love it, right? I was able to take my career prior to business school, prior to Georgetown, and really parlay it into advising clients today. So I would say, business school can change your plans, right? I came in finance consulting. I would say my advice would be to have an idea of what you do want, though, right? When business school starts, it starts fast, right? For me, I had been out of school for 5 years. I hadn't had to study except for the GMAT for 5 years. So for me, like the teamwork, the classes, all on top of trying to look for a job, career days, employers coming on campus, you really had to have some sort of an idea, although you could still explore a bit. By around October, November, I was casing every day, right? So I did multiple practice cases before my interviews, right? Allison, I see you nodding. It was like a second full-time job to classes, right? So by November timeframe, I think you have to decide what direction you want to go, but you also can make changes second year, right? So second year, we do re-recruit, right? We come back, you've had your internship experience. Some people get offers, some people might not, but you can still explore again second year. So business school does open those opportunities and those doors. I think one other thing I want to point out is just kind of what I got from the MBA that's helped me in my career today. The network you build is incredible. The classes you take are incredible, right? My first project, actually, I used my managerial accounting notes. I called my mom. I was like, there's this purple binder in my room. I need it for this project. But outside of that, I think the leadership classes are really what's helped me the most. The interpersonal, critical conversations. How do you deal with tough clients? How do you deal with clients in different locations, remote? There was a case we did about working with clients remotely, and here we are today, working with clients remotely, right? So for me, it was incredibly valuable, the leadership skills that I was able to take from my MBA and parlay that into my day-to-day today at EY. So that was incredibly awesome.
Oh, thank you. Now, Chantal, you're the planner. You went to undergraduate with a plan about your MBA right away. And you've told us that some things changed, but when you're thinking back on applying and you're going to get that MBA, did your job on the other side, has it turned out the way you were expecting back then?
Not exactly, to be honest. But I think that's what, for me, being such a planner, it was important for me to go to business school. I needed to be broken out of this mindset of I have to always have a plan and stick to that plan. There's very little room for flexibility, right? So I remember writing my short and long-term goals essay about how long-term I wanted to be an executive director of a huge nonprofit organization because I wanted to do so much good in the world. And my short-term goal was, in order to get there, I either wanted to be a consultant or a management consultant or a brand manager, but I didn't quite understand what brand management was. It just sounded like something I needed to know in order to make that transition. So technically, I am still on that short-term goal trajectory for now. I think what has changed, though, is in my role, I could be talking to one of social media's biggest influencers, which they don't teach you how to do in business school, or I could be having a conversation with my marketing analytics person about a Google Analytics glitch that happened, right? So I think it's important, absolutely, as Julia said, to go into business school with a plan, but then be open to new opportunities. It actually was after I was admitted to Keenan Flagler and I went to Admitted Student Weekend, there was a session held by a marketer by the name of George Felix, who came and he used to work at P&G. I believe he's since left, but he came in and did a presentation on how he helped to revitalize Old Spice. And he really broke down the business case behind it, the consumer insight behind it. And for me, it crystallized, wait a minute, I can have a strong analytical background and still be a creative person and come up with this incredible marketing campaign that dusts off something that used to be, grandpa's deodorant, right? And so that for me was the game changer that really sort of lit the fire under me to pursue a career in marketing, at least in the short term. And that happened before I even set foot on campus as a full-time student. So I say all that to say, absolutely do your research, have an idea about what you want to do, but it's impossible to know every career opportunity that you'll be presented with in business school because the business world is ever changing, right? You may learn about a startup within your first week of school and say, you know what, instead of going to a big consulting firm, now I want to go work at a cryptocurrency startup. The world is ever changing, and it's really important to remain open-minded and just explore things that sound interesting to you. And if they are at least impactful enough for you to make a pivot, be open to making the pivot or stay the course if you decide that maybe it's not the best fit for the time.
Oh, thank you. My next question, I'm going to make a pitch out here to our listening audience. I've seen one question. I highly encourage you to ask questions. No question is too little, too small, too silly. We have a great variety of experiences and terrific panelists here that would be happy to answer any questions you have. So please do add to the Q&A queue. At this point, I want to talk about networking. I have to say, it's probably not politically correct, but I'm much older than these nice young women. And it wasn't clear to me until pretty much when I retired and figured I wanted to do something else about the power of networking. I think it's more well understood, but if you, Allison, could talk about networking and with relation to your MBA experience, do you still keep in touch with your peers? Have you found it helpful? Anything along those lines?
Yeah, for sure. So I kind of feel like networking feels dirty to a lot of people. Like I think that some people think that it just feels gross, right? It's sometimes people view it as like, oh, I'm just trying to use people to get ahead. And that's not at all the way that I see it. I see it as like you're looking out for others. They're looking out for you. You're making good friends. You're making a good impression on people because you've got integrity and you're delivering on what you say you're going to do. And in that way, you're building advocates for yourself. And if you know of an opportunity and you know of someone looking for one, you make that connection for them, right? You're helping people. And so personally, I found that my MBA, I've made so many friends through that program. All sorts of different types of people too do an MBA. Like I thought it was going to be a lot of finance bros, and there are some finance bros, but there's also like professional poker players and yoga teachers and people who do go on to run NGOs and change the world. And it's pretty cool to be in a room with like a bunch of people that are all incredibly motivated to push themselves and learn and to make an impact. So coming out of the program, I have quite a few friends that did the program with me. I continue to stay involved in the University of Toronto through a student consulting group that I sit on the board for. And I would say that like I've already switched companies once. So I graduated in 2017. I hit a point in MBB where I was just tired of living in hotel rooms and wanted to see my dog and sleep in my own bed on occasion. And I get to do both now. I guess partly by nature of COVID, but more so because I had a classmate that worked at ZS Associates, and I got to learn that it had all of my favorite things about consulting, while it also reduced the intensity level a little bit. So I was able to get a bit more of that work-life balance. So I guess, Lorianne, the piece about networking, not only do I find that I've got all sorts of great people in my life now, but it also has connected me to my current job.
Oh, thank you. That's terrific. Julia, anything you want to add about the network?
Yeah, I think the network is hugely important for your decision on choosing a school, right? It's how strong is the network? Where is the network located? I think for me personally, I went back to Georgetown 5 years after I'd graduated from Penn. And for me, I found that I related to the people in business school and at Georgetown probably more so than other people in my life, right? Because we had all made that conscious decision that we were going to, go back to school. We wanted to learn further. We've all had, Allison, to your point, everyone has different backgrounds, but we all came together with a common interest. So that in itself, I think the network is really important. It's the culture that every school has, right? So as you're looking at schools, make sure you figure out, what is the culture? How is the network built? And now, I probably see my friends still too often. I graduated in 2014. And for those that are in New York, we have a huge presence in New York. We see them often. I would say that for my friends today, we do leverage the network for, next job searches. We leverage the network for interview help, right? So people do reach out to run cases, to go over their resumes, to talk about, what it would be like to work in whatever industry it is, right? And I think no matter where you end up going, the network is a very important part of your decision-making process. And it has remained a huge part of my life today.
Well, thank you, Julia. Now, how about, I would say, confidence, giving back? Chantal, has the MBA helped your ability to raise up the women around you?
Absolutely. One of the things that I made a point to do and continue to make a point to do is to give back to the women who are coming up after me in the same way that the women who came before me helped me. So when I was applying to business school and having my meltdown and thinking that I wasn't good enough, I actually had essentially a panel of women, of MBAs and lawyers who were all women of color and who had really excelled in their career and were role models to me, who said, no, you're going to business school. We're going to get you there, and we will divvy up these schools and make sure that we're reviewing your application so that you get into one of your top choices, and you're going to go, you're going to graduate, and this will be done. You'll have a career you love, right? I realized that was a huge sacrifice on their part, and I wanted to make sure that both while I was in business school and beyond that point, that I could be that for other women. And so I've made sure to stay close with Forte. I'm extremely close still with the faculty and staff at UNC Kenan-Flagler Business School. I also am on the advisory board for the Gwen Ifill School for Media, Arts, and Humanities at Simmons University, and have access to undergraduate women who are considering careers in media and PR. I think it's so important for us to remember those times where we were either the only one in the room or one of few in the room, and we wanted someone else there to back us up, to someone else there who looked like us, to empower us so that we could feel more comfortable. And I, like I said, started my career in financial services. Usually I was the only woman in the room, or if there wasn't another woman in the room, I was for sure always the only Black woman, right? And I remember those experiences and how lonely I felt. So I do everything in my power as often as I can to try to create opportunities for other women to make sure that they have a seat at the table and then pull up a chair for another woman. I think it's really important for us to make those concerted efforts, especially in times like this where we have the additional time. It's all about how we choose to spend it.
Oh, that's really helpful. Good news is I do have a number of questions that have come in. So first, there's a question, I'm going to put these two together. Has the MBA, have you run, post MBA, have you run into the old boy network, imposter syndrome? I mean, has going through the MBA program helped you either recognize it? Did you get some skills, or do you have increased confidence? You know, how does the MBA, and does the MBA help with any of those things that we face in the real life job scene?
Yeah. If it's okay.
Oh yeah, no, good.
Okay. So I think it's interesting because, to be honest, I don't encounter like the old boys club so much anymore. I think there's a really big focus right now in consulting, especially on creating support programs, addressing unconscious bias, really thinking through their hiring practices and trying to ensure that like all candidates are successful, because we recognize that companies that have like equity, especially at like the board level, outperform those that don't, when it comes to like just, you know, returns. It's also the right thing to do. So I think there's a lot of focus right now in corporate circles to try to eliminate the disparity that we see. I think the second thing that happens, it's interesting, is the MBA and the kind of positions that you get coming out of it are seats of power, right? Like you become like one of the like most highly educated people in your society. You get to occupy positions that are prestigious or pay quite well. And so I've almost found like the opposite problem, like when you go on dates and somebody starts talking to you and finds out like how smart you are, you know, or how they perceive you. It does change the way that which people perceive you. So I think that, you know, when it comes to feeling like an imposter or feeling like a phony, I think that like I've personally found, especially since graduation, that a lot of those feelings have kind of gone away. I think partly because of how much you learn and how much you know you're capable of afterwards, but also just because of where you end up afterwards.
Here's a good question.
Yeah.
Let's go for Julia. The question is, did you find that, I guess the real question is directly, are all MBAs extroverts?
Definitely not. Definitely not. I do happen to be an extrovert, although during COVID, I'm finding that there are certain aspects of being an introvert that I actually love. But I would definitely say that MBAs are not all extroverts. And you know, think of a typical group of 10. You're going to have some introverts, you're going to have some mixes of introvert, extrovert, you're going to have some extroverts. I think what the MBA does teach you, though, is what type of leader are you? What type of personality style do you have? I actually remember a class, one of our leadership classes, where we actually did that personality test, and you could see where your classmates all lied, and we were all over the place, right? I would say, though, the fact that I now know that I am more of an extrovert, that I'm an expressive, that I'm a driver, I've been able to figure out how I adapt my style for those that are much more introverted, much more analytical, much more amiable, and absolutely not. We're not all extroverts. So yeah.
Well, that's helpful. Thank you. Allison, and then anyone else could jump in. One of our questions is, you know, she's heard you talk about that the culture of the school is important for a fit, for you getting the most out of it. And she's wondering, how do you research? What's the best way to research the culture? Is it reaching out to alumni, to students? What advice can any or all of you give towards that?
Yeah, I think that might have actually been Chantel. But in my experience, when I was getting to know different schools, I went on campus and I talked to people that went to those programs, and I got a sense really quickly of like whether or not that was a place that I would thrive in and feel comfortable in. I know I went to one school that I like I said, in on some classes and talked to some professors, and there wasn't very much diversity on staff. There wasn't very much diversity in the classroom. I don't know, I guess just the vibe of the whole place just didn't feel right to me. Alternatively, when I went to the University of Toronto or Rotman, I felt really energized every time I was talking to people, and I felt just like full of possibilities, and I was really excited. And so I know that right now, you know, campus visits are a little bit out of the question, but I think even just in getting to talk to different people that are in the student body, you start to get a sense of like what kind of personalities you might encounter at your school. And yeah, what, just like listening to yourself and seeing like what actually feels true to you.
Chantel or Julia, do either of you have anything you'd like to add along those lines?
Yeah, I'd love to add to that. So for me, I actually knew that going into business school, I really wanted to work on who I was going to be as a leader. I was probably the third or fourth youngest out of my class of about 300 incoming students. And it was really important for me to know that even after business school, all of your peers are going to be significantly older than you, but you need to be able to hold your own. You need to be able to still show up as a professional leader who has garnered people's respect. And so I wanted to make sure that I ended up in an environment where I could really figure out what my leadership style was. I wanted to make sure it was going to be a safe space for that. And when I visited Keenan Flagler, there was just a chemistry amongst not only the other admitted students who were there for visiting, but then also amongst the current students. And you'll know when you feel it. You'll also be able to get a sense through talking to students. So one of the things that was also really important for me that I included in my essays to UNC was I wanted to be really active in the Women in Business organization. And I already had a vision for what that could look like. So I reached out to the admissions office, and they actually put me in touch with the current president, or the past president at the time. Her name was Veronica. She too was a Forte fellow. They put me in touch with her. We were able to schedule a couple phone calls, and then she put me in touch with one of her VPs. And at that time, I was already able to build a network within this organization that I already saw myself being a part of. And for me, that's what helped to seal the deal. So I would say above and beyond you know, the classroom experience that you're looking to have, the network that you're trying to build. Think about what you want those 2 years to be, and start reaching out to those schools to find out how might I be able to connect with some current students who are in those organizations or who are having internships or about to head into a full-time position in some of those careers that I'm looking at, because then you'll have an idea of, is that really a good place for you? Are those your kinds of people, right? People are all different, but we know our people, right? And being a New Yorker, I never in a million years thought I would go to school in the South and love it. You know, is it a little bit of an all boys club? Sure, but I went to an all women's college for undergrad. So to be able to go to, you know, a school in the South that's a huge sports school and be able to hold my own was really important for me. And I found a culture that allowed me to thrive within it. So I would say do your research and start to talk to people as early as possible.
Any recommendations in terms of how to reach out to people? Is LinkedIn a way to connect? Is what other suggestions do you have in terms of connecting with the students if you don't already know people that are there?
Yeah, so a lot of schools on their website, they usually have a clubs and activities page. I would just head on over to the clubs and activities page if you already have an idea of what clubs might be of interest, and reach out to the president that way. If you don't hear back, because people are busy, feel free to also email someone within the admissions office and let them know that you are a prospective student and you're looking to speak with someone who does X, and they can sort of go through their Rolodex of students that are their go-tos for that type of thing. But they all have sort of their go-to students who are in certain career paths or lead certain organizations. So you can either try to find them on your own through the website or go through the MBA admissions office.
Well, that's terrific. And now the next question, and let's go to Julia, and then anyone else can chip in if they have some different thoughts. The question is about recommendations when you're filling out your application. How do you determine who to go to? How do you think about that? And especially if you're thinking about using your MBA as a career switch.
Yeah. So I think you know, recommendations are a really important part of your application. And for me, I was very transparent about wanting to get an MBA. So my then boss and I went to him for advice, right? I said, look, I'm currently at a transition point in my career. You know, like I mentioned earlier, I'm looking either at the CFA or the MBA. What's your recommendation? Like getting some advice from him directly. He was my recommender, and I asked a couple other people I worked with as well if they'd be open to being a recommender for me. I'd say be open, right? I think a lot of people understand that an MBA is part of a lot of people's career trajectories. I think one way to help the recommenders is to provide them with bullets that you might want to see reflected in your recommendation, right? So I think about this now as well as a senior manager. I tell my team, keep track of all the accomplishments that you've done, right? What are some of the deliverables you own? How have you shown leadership? So that when I represent you in a feedback discussion, I'm able to actually do that. So I'd say the same thing about recommendations, right? Provide enough detail for them so that they know how to reflect you better in a recommendation for business school.
Terrific. Any Chantel or Allison, do you have any other thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just add, I actually had the opposite experience with my manager when I did share that I was considering business school. And it just so happened that all the other associates within our company, they would typically go to a local school like NYU Stern or somewhere else in New York part-time, and then continue working because they weren't necessarily looking to transition careers. I, on the other hand, had already made up my mind that this was it for me within financial services. And so I wanted to apply full-time. I casually brought up that I was studying for the GMAT, and he was like, oh, well, you're just going to go to Stern like everyone else part-time, right? And after that, we never talked about it again until I gave my resignation letter. But I say all that to say, if you run into a situation where unfortunately your manager has a different idea of what your career should look like, that's okay. You know, many of us do have the beauty of having other professional relationships. My recommendations came from elsewhere on our team. You know, I had a peer who wrote a recommendation for me. One of the AVPs on our team wrote one, and then there was an SVP that I had worked with a couple years back who was more than happy to write a recommendation. And you can definitely, I would highly suggest that you do come up with that bulleted list. What I would recommend, and what I always tell people who ask for my advice when applying, is come up with that list based on what is missing from elsewhere within your application. So if you know, for example, you've taken the GMAT and you're not super confident about your math score, that's okay. Have your recommender talk about how impressed they were with some of the analytical projects that you've done with them, right? Because then that gives the AdCom a little bit more confidence that you can do MBA level quantitative work if they have this other place within your application where someone has spoken to that and given them a little bit more confidence about your skill level in that area. So definitely think about your application holistically and don't think about your recommendations apart from that. It's very much so a piece of the puzzle that matters.
Well, that's very helpful, Chantal. And I know I'm looking at the time here, and it's just about 8 o'clock. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to wrap it up. But I want to thank Julia, Chantal, Allison. These have been very helpful discussions. I have to say I've learned a lot, and I hope our audience has as well. So thanks, everyone.